All right, so shit. That's going in the outtakes for sure. What's up, everybody? So welcome to the podcast. This is episode 3, right? 3. Yeah. So I have Abdallah back here again, the Raging Cajun Abdallah. I don't know why I call him the Raging Cajun Abdallah, because he's not Cajun and he's not raging right now. But you know, well, this is going off for a great start. Yeah. This is great.
That's how we gotta start. We gotta pull the people in before we drop some knowledge.
You drop the knowledge. All right.
You gotta get rid of the nonsense before you can actually drop knowledge. That's how it works.
Speaking of getting rid of nonsense, so I've been on a juice cleanse for the last 4 days. I've been doing that stupid fucking the juice in the raw thing. You drink only 6 juices a day with some raw vegetables and crap. It's I can eat again solid food today, which I'm very happy about. I lost like a couple pounds of water weight. I can see my abs. And
oh, really?
Yeah. So they'll probably dissipate when I start eating like a disgusting idiot again. But other than that, it's been pretty good. I do it probably like once or twice a year to reset the taste buds, because I feel like when I eat a lot of crappy food, I feel like I get more accustomed to that kind of taste of food, like all the processed stuff. And then once I have the kind of raw cleanse, I'm just I taste things more in my food and I'm more conscious of how I feel after I have something.
Now, how does that relate? Obviously you don't drink liquor during that time, right? So I was wondering if that correlates. Does some type of liquor taste better after you do a cleanse than before or something? I don't know.
So when I finished it last night, actually it was Emily's party. Emily's a girl in our lab who just graduated with her PhD. I had a beer, by too many beers at her place last night, I'll be completely honest. But honestly, I had probably 3 or 4, and I was good. I didn't want any more than that, because my liver was basically brand new at that point. It's
okay, fair enough.
Because all your glycogen is basically spent after you have the juice cleanse, because there's basically no sugar in it. So you are more receptive, so to speak, to some of the effects of alcohol. So I was feeling it, but yeah, not as bad as Aiden though. Aiden had Aiden's a pretty small guy in our lab, great dude, really smart guy, but he amazing guy, some of the best guys, believe me. He had a beer called 120 Minute Dogfish Head. That beer, it gets more alcoholic with age. It's almost like a wine. And
okay.
It is anywhere from 15% alcohol to 20% alcohol. And he had as his first beer, and he was like, why am I so drunk? And I looked at him like, you drank that, man? That thing is like a bottle of wine. What are you doing? But yeah, no, it was fun. And the beer was, it tasted pretty good. I mean, it was, it's beer. I like beer.
But it
anyway.
didn't taste different.
It didn't taste different, but I definitely was more affected by alcohol, so to speak, with the content of my belt. But yeah, I mean, it was okay. I mean,
so then you recommend it for the people?
I would recommend it, if you're a big fitness person like I am, and you've kind of fallen off the bandwagon with your diet and stuff, 100% recommend it for sure. JuiceInTheRaw.com if you want to sponsor me. JuiceInTheRaw.com. All
right, well, we'll give them some more instructions about that.
Yeah, I'll put a link in the bio and the WordPress site. And also, announcement to everybody. We are posting this podcast on iTunes, so it's called the Lone Chemist Podcast on iTunes. And also, we have a WordPress site up, which I'll be posting some of my reviews for movies, and we'll be posting maybe some collaborated stuff with me and Abdallah, and we'll definitely post all the podcast episodes if you don't want to do it through iTunes. So it's lonechemist.com, and I'll put a link in the bio of this video. All right, now we got all the bullshit out of the way. Let's get into the meat. So last time we had a podcast, we talked about world building and effectively building worlds from scratch, and also from adapted sources like books or plays or whatever. And our first kind of bout into this was centered mostly on some of the mechanisms to bring the world to life in terms of writing the story and conveying the story, like, character archetypes, events, foils, all that kind of stuff. So, and with the exception of a couple things you brought up with cinematography, we did it mostly on formulating the world. But So now what I want to do is do a part 2 of this world building and basically bring in the logistical or the technical aspects of making a movie from, progressing from an original world. So I like to focus on just the actual techniques that are used to bring a story to life, regardless of how effectively the world is written or conceived, but how you actually bring it to the screen.
Okay, sounds like fun.
Sounds like fun. Nothing to add. I was just, I was monologuing for you. It's good.
I feel, to be specific, things like what are the techniques that, film writers, filmmakers, what techniques do they employ to bring these worlds to life? In a way, well, if it is original, for sure, you have to build it from scratch. So you may have to employ some innovation. But if you're adapting it from something that's either well-known or something that's obscure, what elements do you add to, what do you bring to the table to sort of elevate it beyond the source material? In a way, that's going to be more enduring. So those are the things that we'll get into a little bit.
For sure. So I think a great place to start is not just the visual of a movie, but also the audio, because I think that film scoring kind of separates the men from the boys, so to speak, in a world building kind of a perspective in movies. I feel like film scoring is something that you don't really understand how important it is until it's actually set behind a movie, and let's say you take it away. Film scoring is something that sets the mood for a movie. It sets the world that it's actually set in. Like, you actually get this kind of sentiment when you watch a movie with a great score. The music not only directs you about how to feel, but also can accentuate certain scenes. It can give you kind of an overall perspective of what kind of world is presented to you, whether it's ominous, whether it's happy or optimistic. And I feel like film scoring is a very subtle thing that, again, like we talked about before, not many screenwriters can make worlds effectively. Not many film scorers can, effectively help build a world. But film scoring is something I feel like is indispensable in movies, and it's not talked about as much as I think it should be. Obviously, there are there's a lot of notoriety with great film composers like Hans Zimmer and
right.
John Williams.
John Williams.
Yeah, but film scoring is something that it's very subtle, and I think it's arguably probably one of the most important things you can do when you're actually making a world. You have to have the music of the world set the tone and sentiment for the world that you're actually presenting in a movie.
And just a very recent sort of illustration of that is, if you thinking about our favorite studio, DC. When they were making the movie Justice League, you had obviously a change of directors, but with the change of directors came a change of tone, which meant that the original film composer was no longer suitable to work in a different tone. So when Joss Whedon came in, Junkie XL had to be eased off the project, and Danny Elfman had to replace him, because the score that Danny Elfman was going to bring to the table was going to be more suitable or more suited to the movie that Joss Whedon was trying to tell, as opposed to the original Zack Snyder sort of vision. And so that's just a recent example of why, just to illustrate your point, why movie scoring is important, because
for sure,
who does the score, what they bring to the table is very important. A Junkie XL score with a Joss Whedon movie may not have worked at all, but a Junkie XL score with Zack Snyder, we saw actually works pretty well.
For sure. And also, just to go off that point, I feel like Danny Elfman, even though some of the score was derivative, I as a film dork, I really enjoyed some of the callbacks to classic superheroes, like his original Batman theme. I really enjoyed that, because I'm obviously a huge fan of the 1989 Batman, and Danny Elfman did that one. And even though there were some places where it didn't really work so well, I appreciated the fact that they're trying to set the world in a similar way that Danny Elfman did with Batman, even though it's completely different, of course. I mean, 1989's Batman is much, much, much better of a film than Justice League, but I kind of like that as a film goer, like those kind of throwbacks to movies that we like, the nostalgia.
And one thing that I appreciated myself was that he was not very bashful about using his own score, because
sure, yeah.
part of, and I will go into it in more detail, but part of the effectiveness of a movie score, especially when you're talking about a franchise, is that you have the repetition of these musical cues that will sort of underscore whatever they're meant to represent, so that you make the association almost unconsciously. You hear that Superman theme that John Williams developed back in the late 70s. You hear hints of it in the Justice League, and that's something that evokes some type of emotion. It was a little bit unfortunate because I think he was sort of hesitant to borrow a little bit too much of it. He wasn't so hesitant to use his own Batman score, but I think the Superman score was just used sparingly, which was appropriate in some levels, but at other points I wish there was a little bit more explicit sort of recognition. And that's one of the main issues that Marvel has, because we talked about different directors will have different composers, because now Marvel, you have a character being handled by different directors, which means that the characters are handled by different movie composers, and you have inconsistency in musical cues that refer to these characters, which is why a lot of people are right when they say that Marvel scores they're not iconic or they're not memorable, because you don't have that repetition. So Iron Man has probably 4 or 5 different themes across all the movies that he's been in. Obviously, Batman, you had Chris Nolan had it when he directed Batman. Obviously, had his own score with Hans Zimmer. But when Hans Zimmer directed he scored with Junkie XL Batman vs. Superman, then that original score was gone. So he was replaced by something I would say of comparable quality, in my own opinion.
Was Zimmer and Elfman you're talking about?
Junkie XL. Junkie XL. This is Batman vs. Superman.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, gotcha.
So they composed a new Batman theme for that movie, but they borrowed the same Superman theme from Man of Steel. So there was continuity there, but then it was a new Batman theme. So that was to differentiate it between, hey, this is not Nolan's character. It's a different type of Batman. Therefore, he should have his own music. And the music fit well with the movie, I thought. Obviously, Justice League, if Junkie XL exits the project, then if you find that there's enough similarity between the Batman character of Justice League versus the 1989 Batman, then it's fine to borrow from that theme and put it into this movie. But it's not Nolan's Batman, so you don't use Nolan's theme into this movie. I hope that makes sense.
No, for sure. And I think that beautifully kind of illustrates the point that, like, these subtleties in score matter. Like, they absolutely matter for your perception of the character and your interpretation of the world. Like, what we just said, it probably doesn't really go through the minds of anybody that watched the movie, except for us, dweebs of film that, are fanboys. But like, it's true. Like, film scoring can set a tone for the entire film, and those little intricacies, they really matter. And, if a movie score is effective, it goes beyond just a movie. It enters pop culture in a way that's enduring. So, you'll have people playing it in high school bands, playing that music from this movie regularly. So, for example, and we'll get into this movie in more detail. For example, Star Wars, like the Darth Vader's theme, is a very, very famous theme of music history in general, not just modern film scoring, but I would say in the entire history of music. And so, because you know that theme is associated with a villain, you hear it popping up every time in pop culture you have some type of villainous element. One of the more famous examples is the New York Yankees. Whenever the New York Yankees sometimes pull up in somebody else's arena, they play that music because the Yankees are like, they're richer than everybody. They can buy all the best players, so they're like the villains of baseball. So they're the empire.
They're the empire, exactly. So you have that association, and people understand exactly what it means. It's getting to the point where, because it's so pervasive in our society, it becomes an unconscious association.
Yeah, for sure. And I like what you said there about how the music can transcend even the film. Like, I think a great example of that is something like Harry Potter. Like we started the podcast off last time with Harry Potter. If you hear the Harry Potter theme, it's clear that it is from Harry Potter, and even without seeing anything from the movie, you know that it's from Harry Potter. And there's an example of, like, if you hear mostly anything from the score from Harry Potter, like even the more ominous, like kind of subtle stuff, you would know that's from Harry Potter, because like that theme is so iconic. So that world is set within the sentiment of that music. But something like a world that didn't really work, like for example Avatar, if you hear the score from that movie, you won't recognize it. Exactly. I would be hard pressed, and I have like a idiot savant memory of movies, but like you'd be hard pressed to, like, you couldn't play for me an excerpt from Avatar and I'd be like, oh, Avatar, there you go. Like and so the music kind of exists. If it works correctly, it becomes so associated with the film that it almost becomes separate in a way. It's you can hear it and you immediately associate it with the world it's presented, and it almost stands by itself. Like you were saying, it transcends even the film.
And I agree with that completely. Avatar is this weird sort of movie because it made all of the money in the world when it came out. Obviously, it was a huge cinematic experience, unprecedented. Nobody has ever seen the likes of it before. But then Star Wars, the first Star Wars came out more than 40 years ago. You still see people going to like conventions dressed as stormtroopers, Darth Vader, Luke Skywalker, Leia. These are, and Solo, obviously. A movie, obviously, 40 years later, a movie about Han Solo being made was supposed to be subject to so much scrutiny because people were so much in love with that character. They don't want it to be butchered in any way. So the point is, those are iconic characters. They endured to pop culture this entire time. And, obviously the music endured as well. So Avatar, in terms of a phenomenon, was supposed to be comparable, right? In terms of how much money it made, in terms of
all the pieces were there for sure. Yeah. The
originality of that world.
Yeah.
But then you don't really see anybody dressing up like Avatar characters in a convention today. So it's kind of like a weird thing, and maybe it'll take a couple of sequels being successful to really establish it. But I mean, obviously we weren't alive when Star Wars came out, but I felt like that sort of impact was more immediate. Obviously, he made a lot of money in his own right. If you think about inflation, Star Wars in today's dollars would have made about 1.5 billion just domestic, as far as I know.
Just A New Hope.
Yeah, just A New Hope. Wow. Domestically speaking, American Canadian box office would have made about 1.5 billion dollars in today's money. So everybody saw it. Everybody fell in love with it right away. It was completely blown away because it was like a shift in cinema as well. Like cinema changed after that movie came out. Cinema changed a little bit after Avatar came out with the whole 3D, but then people got sick of it because the content in terms of quality was no longer matching with the technology. Yeah, but then again, we'll see if James Cameron can bring that magic back in terms of getting people to come to the cinema just to enjoy that 3D experience, but then serve us music that will actually endure, serve us characters that will actually endure, and then we'll see how we feel about it 40 years from now.
Yeah, I don't know, man. Like, I enjoyed Avatar the first time I saw it. It kind of doubled down on the 3D thing in almost a pretentious way, like, to be completely honest, like in my eyes. If we're going like to talk about like Avatar and stuff, we'll get into like back into film scoring. We're like all over the place right now, which is good. But like it's just like the fact that the story was so derivative of that movie, and all the pieces were there for it to be like an iconic like masterpiece, right? And I just feel like there's a lot of things that worked against it that didn't allow it to transcend pop culture in the way that something like Star Wars or Harry Potter did. Case in point, highly original world. Like, you know, all of the aspects of Avatar were completely original, like the way the creatures looked, to the way the animals looked, and the biology of the creatures I thought was actually really fascinating. Like, you know, and the whole commentary on like environmentalism and secularism versus religious you know, religious belief, like with the whole thing with Awa and stuff. All the pieces were there for a movie to be, you know, inspiring in terms of world building, but I just feel like the execution of the story. I mean, we talked about it last time in the podcast, Dancing with Smurfs. Yeah, but yeah,
like you said,
yeah,
all of the elements of world building were there. Yeah, it's just the story didn't bring them together the way it should have.
And in a lot of ways, I think that like some of the aspects of world building are actually better than in Avatar. I'm talking about some of those aspects of world building that are in that movie are better than a lot of movies that have, like, you know, really great worlds. Like I think that there are things logically that make more sense in Avatar than they do in Star Wars, for example. But you know, like you said, the story has to be there, and the story has to link things together, and all these elements have to be there, and the music has to be there, and all these things have to synthesize together in a way that's, you know, endearing to the audience. And I just feel like it didn't really do it with Avatar. And your point about like sequels maybe you know, reviving and revitalizing the genre, I don't think so. I think that if we were going to get a sequel, it should have been done by now, because like you have like a catch period. You have to introduce a concept and then keep the audience engaged. And I feel like if Avatar 2 was released tomorrow, I don't think that like nearly as many people would see it as they would for like the Avengers, because the Avengers capitalized on an incredibly lucrative market quickly. Like every 8 months they have a superhero movie out. And with Avatar, I feel like the magic's kind of gone, like from at least that aspect of the world.
Yeah, I mean, Avengers is a mature world. They got to the point where now they can comfortably produce 3 movies a year. They've been doing it for the last 2 years. I think they'll continue for at least the next 5 years. So they earned that right. Avatar, budget-wise, I don't know how many movies he's shooting back to back. I believe he's doing 2 or 3 at the same time.
He wants to do 2, 3, and 4 at the exact same time, which
at the exact same time. So I feel like the budget for that, he's getting close to like $1 billion just budget wise.
Yeah, for sure.
I remember Infinity War, people were saying something about how both movies, Avengers 3 and 4, were costing about $1 billion together. So, you know, I would say money could be the reason why he waited so long, getting the right stories, getting, you know, it has to be story based, right? So it takes time, you know, but he's making 3 in a row. Obviously, they have to all be good, otherwise it's complete waste of time. And because you know the audiences won't come back for the next 2 if the second one isn't good.
Yeah, and that's I think the real danger of the thing he's actually talked about. This is actually fascinating now that we're talking about the subject. But so you know, I remember we talked about in a private conversation that you know, Peter Jackson essentially filmed all 3 Lord of the Rings more or less simultaneously. Like he would film like you know, one scene from the Return of the King, and then he would do back to Fellowship of the Ring. But the difference there, and I think James Cameron wants to do something similar with Avatar 2, 3, and 4. He wants to build that world, and then he wants to, you know, film them all like out of sequence. Like maybe in the first day of shooting, for example, he'll film something from like the last movie, like Avatar 4, and then the next week it'll be Avatar 3, then back to 4, then 2, and whatever. And that's admirable. It's a good juggling task, but you have to have the world be established completely before you're going to do something like that. Peter Jackson would never do an original story and then do it with, you know, 3 movies back to back simultaneously, and then like intersplice in different production dates for the different movies. He had a world set up for him by J.R. Tolkien, which was a very, very effectively set up world before, you know, he even dared to do something like that. The reason why the Harry Potter books were, you know, so logically consistent is because they borrowed from source material that is very logically set up, like we talked about in the first podcast. And if you're going to do something like that, you know, there are a lot of other things you have to consider too, like the audience reaction to it. You know, like make one movie and see how the audience reacts to it, and it would be a different thing if Avatar 1 was this global phenomenon still, but it's not. It's like you said, it's like it'd be curious tactics to go to a Comic-Con convention like dressed up as a Na'vi, and if the world was set up very effectively in the first film, I feel like he could definitely do that and build this 3-movie sequel kind of thing. But I think it's kind of a fool's errand to film basically 10 hours of content and not really even know if the first 3 hours of it and the sequel are going to really take well to the audiences. Yeah,
so he's really betting on himself, and I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. Obviously James Cameron is
one of the best directors ever. Yeah,
it's not somebody you can really question in terms of what he's done. Obviously, this is what he does. But one thing to just add to what you said, the risk, you're risking the cohesiveness of the story. Let's say we give him that benefit of the doubt. Let's say, a lot of people have vetted the stories. They say, okay, well, this is filmable. This is going to be very compelling, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing you have to worry about, like you said, Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter had been established in books before these movies were being shot. So the actors, the performers, and the crew all had the opportunity to read the source material and to see where everything was going. So if you're an actor, let's say playing Frodo across 3 movies, but then one scene you're shooting something towards the end of production, let's say you're on Mount Doom and you're shooting that early on, because you've read the book, you know what journey your character goes through, so that you know what emotions to present when that scene is being filmed. If you're an actor from Avatar, you don't have any of that sort of thing. So you just have to rely on scripts without really knowing visually what that world looks like. And so, you have to rely very strongly on the strength of your actors to bring the performances home.
For sure.
And obviously, like you said, in some ways, maybe you can overcompensate with the technical elements, make sure that cinematography is on point, make sure the music is on point, editing, all of that stuff. That could help put the movie together. But there is a very high chance that it will just fall apart completely.
And it's one thing to emphasize certain elements of, a world building exercise, for example. This isn't really a world building example, but I think Birdman by Alexander Inarritu is one of the best movies ever made. And one thing that gets a lot of attention is its cinematography. It's beautiful. It's one of the most incredible feats of cinematography ever put in the film. But that's not the only good thing about the film. The writing is really good. The characters are really good. The story is hilarious and tragic at the same time. The score complements the movie, has a ferocity to it. And so
the drums.
Exactly. But so my point is, you can't have these isolated elements of these stories to build effective worlds. They have to all complement each other, very, very effectively. And I chose my words carefully because complement is the key word. You can't replace something in a movie like a good story for great cinematography. And I feel like if they just focused on the technical aspects and not actually push the world forward, it's not going to be effective, and it's going to be kind of a waste of time, because it's one thing to have great cinematography, but it's another thing to have great cinematography, a great score, great characters, a catharsis in the movie, and all those things have to come together for us to buy into the world as audience members. And obviously we sound pretentious because we're so hard to please, because we want all these elements to come together seamlessly, and it's hard for people that make movies to do this, and I recognize that. But you have to spend a lot of time on the drawing board in the editing room to really make these worlds actually work.
There's a movie I want to bring up. I've never seen the whole thing. I don't know if you have. Have you ever seen the Tree of Life by Terrence Malick?
Terrence Malick, yeah.
So Terrence Malick is one of these eccentric types where he doesn't really do much preparation before he films. He just starts filming, maybe relies on intuition, things happening spontaneously, and then the movie comes together as he's progressing towards the actual filmmaking process. So most people, like Marvel, for example, they spend months, maybe even a year on pre-production before they actually start filming, making sure everything is. Well, part of it is they do deal with big budgets, so they don't have time to afford to actually waste time. Because that will get you fired. As probably this is what happened in the production of Solo, but that's a different story. But Terrence Malick, maybe he doesn't really deal with budgets that big, so he has more creative freedom to be able to really explore the art of filmmaking itself and actually get a movie together based on just some of those things. But in his case, he's a master of all the technical elements. His cinematography is excellent. The camera is always moving. I've seen like parts of it. The camera always pans and it cuts very quickly between scenes. That is something that kind of draws you in. It could be distracting in sometimes, but it usually grabs you. And his characters, they're not necessarily always that relatable. I don't want to say compelling, but relatable. So the sort of extraneous technical elements are part of what helps actually put together a good story. And just based on, The Tree of Life was one of those movies where it was decidedly mixed. You either loved it or you hated it. But you couldn't really deny that it was a technically masterful movie. Now, whether the story actually comes together or not is what was up to debate. So there is a counterpoint to what you were saying a little bit to people like him.
No, for sure. But The Tree of Life was not building a world. It was a one-off movie that I guess it was an art house kind of movie. But what I'm talking about is like all the elements have to come together to make a world that's relatable. And The Tree of Life, I liked it. It was a good movie. But if you try to build an original world using the techniques of Tree of Life, you would be indebted to the studio like $100 million, never work again. Like an art house movie like that, or like Knight of Cups, like the Christian Bale movie he did, where he basically had like 10 pages of a script and then he just filmed whatever the fuck he wanted. Yeah, like in an art house kind of movie like that, you can absolutely do that, and it can be really compelling, and the colors and the color palette and the cinematography and the sound design can be amazing. But if you're building a world to actually encompass the audience in, it's a lot harder to do that when you don't iron out the details of every single aspect ahead of time. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
You won't build a franchise out of it.
For sure.
Which is kind of the point of this podcast a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. We as audience members have to buy into a movie, so we want to see more movies. That's what building a world is. And not even further than that, we have to, almost become encompassed and enveloped in the world in a way that, we wouldn't if all these elements came together very well.
Right.
Yeah. No. I feel like we're like talking in circles. Like it's like we got to get the script right. We got to get the cinematography right.
We haven't actually gone off topic yet, but we can be more specific now about music.
Let's get back to music. Yeah, we can talk about that now.
So historically, you can say if you wanted to trace the history of music through cinema, you would have to obviously go back in the early days, like early 1900s. Where you had silent movies that were basically entirely based on the score.
The score was the point,
yeah. So the score was the point. The score actually anchors you as the viewer through the story. Otherwise, who wants to sit in front of a TV just being silent? You wouldn't watch that movie. It wouldn't be compelling enough to hold your attention. But then, in the late 1920s, that's when you started having, the talkies, where you have the characters actually being able to speak. And music at that point started taking a different sort of meaning. And I would say, historically speaking, the first major film score would probably be, like in terms of massive scale, would probably be King Kong in 1933 by Max Steiner.
I agree.
It was just, King Kong is an epic story. You have an epic character for epic scale, obviously the biggest character in all of Hollywood history at that point. He's going into a world where you have dinosaurs in there, you have giant snakes.
Monkey.
Yeah, so you have, I don't know, was Skull Island itself, the indigenous people there. So all of these different elements have to have their own musical cues, and Max Steiner did an excellent job of that, setting that world up. When they go back to New York, King Kong had his own music. Every time he moved, he would be accompanied by music.
Yeah.
Because, part of it was you were limited by the technology you had, right? You had not motion capture, but Stop motion, yeah. So you accentuate his movements with the music, sort of makes the movements less distracting. So that was something useful there. And he just sort of clued Hollywood in that, hey, we can really make movies of this scale and have them come together in a way that never really did before.
Yeah, it's epic for sure.
And it's epic. So, a few years later, you have movies like, I would say 1939 was a defining year in cinema history. But in terms of movie scores, you have something like Gone with the Wind, one of the most epic movies filmed, 4 hours long. And Wizard of Oz, which
Wizard of Oz
ended up
is,
winning the Oscar for Best Music that year. So the original pieces in those movies are still enduring. Over the Rainbow was, I think, voted like #1 song by the recording. I don't know what
some pretentious membership club of like people that do music.
But so it was some entity that voted it the #1 song in like American history. So
yeah, but it transcended so many different mediums of entertainment. I mean, it was a beautiful song and it fit the movie beautifully. It's it's still something that you hear today for sure. I would say that in terms of historical progression, probably Somewhere Over the Rainbow is like one of the best songs ever written. It's like it's still like you said, it endures today. It's crazy. And most of the songs, and one example of that is the score when the Wicked Witch of the West comes in, like like people sing that as like a joke like these days, and they probably don't even know this from the Wizard of Oz. Like it's become something that's like permeated into culture, and the music just fits the movie so well that it's like we said at the beginning of this, it transcends the movie while still complementing it in some ways.
Right. And because you have different, that movie was, in terms of world building, that's a good movie to like actually focus on, because you have Kansas and then you have the world of Oz, right? So different color palette, obviously. Every colors pop into it. The music changes. The characters become more colorful, more eccentric, and it just all comes together. So you can really accentuate the disparities within the themes of the movie through all of these different elements. So music really started playing a bigger role into the thematic meaning of a movie after that point.
Isn't that so strange how music was the point of the movie before that? You had silent films, and you set the entire world to the sentiment of a score because there's no talking in the movies. And then once you actually like have less music in the movie, that's when it becomes more important. Which is like I think it's kind of interesting, the fact that it becomes an element that is not the only focus of the movie. It becomes something that's judiciously and carefully selected and used. And in that way, it becomes a much more important element of setting a world. Where in silent movies, you had just the music, and that was the only thing you had to do to set against the audio and all that.
Yeah, and then you just have to see what happened after that point. So, 1937, Snow White came out. So Disney started, Walt Disney, the original Walt Disney, started putting out his movies. You had Snow White, you had Pinocchio, Dumbo. All of these kind of movies with their own music, being integral players into the world that they were trying to build. So now you moved into, you have animated movies, and you moved into sort of fairy tale land, but these things they're not necessarily that compelling on a visuals medium. But if you don't have the music to go with it, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Bambi, all these different things. So. And that I would say maybe that probably started with the Wizard of Oz, continued through the Disney cartoons that were coming out in the 40s and 50s.
Yeah.
And then you also had the birth of musicals and all that. Musicals, obviously.
Well, I think the Wizard of Oz. I think it proved not only could you do like technically amazing things with movies, but it also proved there was a market for musicals, like in the filmmaking era. And I feel like if the Wizard of Oz was never made, we probably wouldn't have gotten all these iconic Disney movies that are considered in the same vein as Wizard of Oz. But yeah, Wizard of Oz was, I think probably one of the most influential movies probably ever made. Like, I'd say top 10. I mean, it was a groundbreaking film in so many aspects. And like you said, it gave birth to almost a subgenre of films where you have these kind of whimsical fairy tales, like, Bambi, and then, obviously decades later, you had The Lion King and other different musicals. Yeah, and if the precedent of music wasn't set very early on, like you said, with Gone with the Wind and Wizard of Oz, it would have never happened.
Right, absolutely. And then, what happened in the 40s and 50s is, I would say the proliferation of short cartoons, or like Looney Tunes, Hanna-Barbera, Tom and Jerry,
yeah,
where music was absolutely important. So, you can watch Looney Tunes or Tom and Jerry, those kind of cartoons, if in silence, it really doesn't work. Yeah, you hear that music and it resonates, right? So
it transcends the actual medium it's presented in. Like
right.
It's, yeah.
Slapstick. You have the sound, weird sound effects, but then the music is always in the background, so you can't turn that off. Back then they were like cleaning up Oscars, like short, Oscar for best animated short.
Oh yeah,
winning everything. Nowadays only Pixar really does that in front of their own movies, where they have like an animated short, usually silent but accentuated by music in a way that really brings the emotion out of it. And obviously nobody does emotion better than Pixar does. So that's sort of the tradition that they inherited, then that they're presenting in a different way today. But that's kind of how music progressed throughout time,
Yeah. And then, go on. I want to make a good point.
Other epic movies, the composers who were really active during that time, like Bernard Herrmann.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like he worked almost exclusively with Hitchcock, the way that John Williams and Steven Spielberg were like a team. So, all these classic Hitchcock movies, part of the reason why they retained their classic status today was not only because they were, excellent movies, but also you have the iconic music in there, like Psycho, Vertigo. And the Psycho shower scene was one of the top 10 or top 5 most iconic scenes in cinema.
For sure.
Imagine if that had different music. Imagine if you had different music.
Yeah, if the Home Alone music was on, it probably wouldn't have gone so well.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that music, every time you hear it, exactly, it signifies danger, like clear and present danger. So, so the power of music basically just started growing over time as these movies became more and more complex.
Yeah, another example of that, I mean, I think a composer doesn't really get his fair share of credit is Ennio Morricone, who made probably one of the most iconic scores ever, Good, Bad, and the Ugly, and a bunch of spaghetti western movies. Like he's
the westerns.
Yeah, he's one of the ones who really made the western genre into the forefront. And it's funny because he's a composer. Like, he's not the one making the movie, but his input in those kinds of films really made them into the mainstream. Like, you had this kind of this new American Renaissance era where all these spaghetti westerns are coming out, and Ennio Morricone's score and his taste for music and his placement of score really played a huge part in that. And you even see him if we're going off topic here, even today, Quentin Tarantino's most recent movie, The Hateful Eight, the music of that movie is so perfect that if you hear that outside of the movie, like, you think that everyone around you is like plotting your death, like like you're eating your oatmeal and you think someone's gonna poison you or something. You're like, and so that's
an example where music is very economical, because I don't think it actually plays when they're speaking. It's only like when he had, he broke it down by chapters, right?
Yeah.
So when you have like the title card of the chapter come on, you have the music, and then the scenes. I think he made the scenes extra long so that he can fit that music, because the origin, the title cards, if you will, was pretty long. It was like 4 or 5 minutes of just somebody driving a
Stagecoach.
carriage.
Yeah, it was meant to be kind of an overture, though. Like it was like kind of
overture. So something I was going to bring up is the style back in the day was you had an overture where you present the major musical motifs of the movie, and then as the movie is playing, you will hear elements of that overture into the movie, so you know exactly what it refers to. So King Kong did that. You had the King Kong overture playing while all the credits were rolling, but there was no movie screen. It was just static screen. You had all of the names, but then you had the music in the background, which sort of like whet your appetite for the type of movie you're gonna see. And that really continued until I would say the 60s and 70s. So, Maurice Jarre, who did the score for what is that movie? The movie Lawrence of Arabia.
Oh yeah,
and
for sure.
Dr. Zhivago. All of those types of movies had overtures. And then those overtures ended up being the main musical motif, and you would hear it, and it would signify something when you hear it. So that's kind of how it worked, and we kind of moved away from that. But somebody I would really, like somebody like I don't know, maybe a Tarantino or a Spielberg, like just bring back some of that classic sort of movie making,
and I feel
they can pull it off.
Oh, no, for sure. Like, and I think that people like Chris Nolan, I feel like people like Tarantino have kind of proved there's a market for like this kind of nostalgia for film. I mean, Tarantino's
La La Land with musicals.
Yeah, La La Land with musicals for sure. I mean, again, to Stan Lat, that's probably one of the best musicals ever made, and it's made in 2017. That's crazy. Like the fact that it was so effectively used, and it was basically like a callback to the Roaring Twenties kind of musical that was made, is pretty awesome. Absolutely. But to stay on the subject of Tarantino, I feel like he and Wes Anderson to an extent, and Nolan, they've kind of proved there's this market for nostalgia in movies, like, filming on film and actually cutting your film and actually, making cuts with a pair of scissors and like, editing that way and then presenting it in like a roadshow format and having an overture that kind of presents some of the musical themes. And, there's a lot of revivals of certain kinds of filmmaking techniques that are today, that are coming today, and I feel and so I feel like they definitely won't appeal to everybody, but I think that if you appreciate the art of filmmaking and you appreciate why movies are made and how they kind of came to fruition, like you and I were talking about the progression of movies and music and history, I feel like I'd be really receptive to something like that. Like if they have like back in like the 30s and 40s, going to the movies was like an event. It was like almost like a Broadway show. Like you buy your ticket, you reserve it in advance, and you get dressed up, and like you go, and it's like a 10-minute overture that kind of presents some of the themes. Then you have like an intermission, and I feel like if people did that today, I think there'd be a market for it for sure. I think that there definitely is a demand for I get not art house. I don't want to say that, but the just pure nostalgic aspect of making movies, like the old time ragtime kind of movies that really influenced like us today. I feel like that people would go see those for sure. And it kind of brings back to music. Like music played a huge role in those movies. They had overtures, they had programs, they had like original scores, and even though that's kind of gone the way of the dodo bird recently, I feel like there are some people that are trying to bring it back, and effectively so, like the Hateful Eight, for example.
Yeah, I mean, Tarantino basically is single-handedly responsible for reviving the Western genre, right? So
yeah, Django Unchained, the Hateful Eight.
Nobody's really making those types of movies anymore, but he can get away with them because he's gonna put a modern twist on it, and part of that modern twist is incorporating modern music, and nobody does that better than Tarantino, using music that's already been released as part of your inspiration for how you actually structure your scenes. And that's the way his process works. Is he'll have a song play. James Gunn did the same thing for Guardians of the Galaxy. He'll have the music playing, and then you can sort of imagine how you would have the visual representation of the music.
Yeah.
Baby Driver did the exact same thing. That is exactly what Baby Driver, that kind of movie is.
Yeah.
Driven entirely by music, where the motion picture is actually there to accompany the music and not the other way around.
No, for sure.
That just sort of, again, elevates the importance of music in terms of what it can do and what it, again, it has to be in the right hands. You have to be very passionate and very skilled to be able to pull that off. And the people we brought up so far, like Edgar Wright, James Gunn, Tarantino, these are the types of people who can get that right.
For sure. And yeah, it's really interesting the part you brought up about it. Tarantino, with the exception of The Hateful Eight being his first original score for the movie, he's never really used a score. It's been all just
right.
Rip raps from different genres and different films and stuff. But he makes it in such a way where it becomes iconic with his scenes. Like, did you see my video essay I made on Tarantino? If you're watching this, please subscribe and watch it. But so I talk about the fact that he uses these songs that don't really work with the scenes out of context, but for some reason it registers an emotional response with the viewer, and it makes his movies memorable. It makes movies iconic. Like the Reservoir Dogs scene. If you saw any other movie with someone's ear getting cut off, the Stuck in the Middle with You by Steel Wars Wheel, you'd be probably horrified or disgusted. But for some reason, he works it into this plot almost seamlessly, and he makes music an integral part of his movies that you can't imagine that scene without that song, which is so strange. It's like a horror movie. Like it's a the guy's being tortured, and there's a guy with a button-up shirt and tuxedo dancing around, and then he has a razor and cuts his ear off. Like that's insane. And then for all of his other movies, he borrows stuff from Seven Samurai, which is a great movie, and he puts a lot of that in Kill Bill. Death Proof, not one of his better movies, but he kind of encapsulated that grindhouse era, action music, kind of sentiment in his movies. And I say in that video that Tarantino is a master of genre. Like, he knows exactly how genres are supposed to be conveyed in a medium where it's applicable to the audience. Like, he knows how a genre is supposed to make someone feel. So now he knows that, okay, what if I mix up genres? What if I put blaxploitation and westerns in the same movie? What if I put a whodunit mystery with a western movie? What if I do a revenge story but with a blonde woman who's a supermodel? It's these interesting elements that he's able to synthesize together, and a huge reason why he's able to do that is because he masters, the dichotomy of visual and audio. He knows exactly how to tune the audio of his scenes to whatever he's trying to present.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a skill, definitely something that's not everybody can do it.
Yeah, it's like he looks for the rhythm of the movie. There was a great interview he gave with I forget who it was. It's some guy on CBS, but he was talking about his process of making movies, sans him getting an original score. He has a huge record room because he's a big vinyl revival kind of guy, and so he just sits in the record room, and when he has an idea for a script, he listens to all these records, and he just tries to find the beat of the movie, the rhythm, so to speak. And so from the feeling he gets from those songs, he's able to write scenes that kind of accompany those musical moments quite well. And it's interesting because usually it goes the other way around. You make a movie and then you score on top of it with you have a couple of themes in mind, obviously, when you're making a movie, but it usually comes in the aftermath. That's why they make the movie and then the score kind of follows suit in most cases. But it's an interesting out of order kind of production design that he does. But I think for him it works very, very well.
Yep, absolutely. And again, not for everyone.
Not for everyone, for sure.
Not for everyone. All
right.
But yeah, to bring it back to world building, besides that, so we've sort of traced the history of music through, I would say, through the 60s. The 70s, for me, I consider the 70s to be probably the most classic era of cinema in terms of the best movies came out during that time. You have Francis Ford Coppola's movies. You have, obviously people like Spielberg getting started. People like
Ridley Scott with Alien. Yeah.
Ridley Scott. All these different things. Sci-fi became a big thing. Obviously, something like Godfather is a gangster movie. Then you have some sort of somewhat fantastical movies like Exorcist and all those things, uh, all of those had to have a different musical palette, right? So the music had to underscore them in different ways. But one of the things that sort of came about was a revival of a very old musical technique, the technique of the leitmotif. So academically speaking, you can say it was invented by Richard Wagner when he was doing his like epic operas, like I think it's called Der Ring das Nibelungen, which is like one of the original epic stories. But basically, a leitmotif is like a musical cue that is associated with either a character or a place or an object. So John Williams, who came to prominence in the 70s, that's kind of the musical style that he prefers. So he would have like a musical cue, maybe anywhere between 10 to 30 seconds, that would be associated with a thing. And it would be repeated so often in the movie that you know exactly what the association is. And obviously, you know, Jaws, for example, when that shark is around, there is a very particular music that starts playing. So that's one of the most obvious examples of that. You can say the quintessential illustration of that is Star Wars.
Yep.
Which had, I don't know, I want to say over 50 different leitmotifs in the history of Star Wars to refer to different things. So Luke Skywalker has his own music. Yeah. Leia has her own music. The Force theme has its own music. The Stormtroopers, even the TIE fighters, those Imperial ships have their own, so their own music. And so not only does that allow you to make associations as you see them, but it also allows you to track the way those associations are progressing through the movie. So yeah. Musically, you can easily make variations of music, and based on the variation, the way the music varies, you can see what it's trying to accomplish. So like the Force theme, which is probably the most prevalent theme in the movie, that's the first thing you hear when the Star Wars opens. And obviously you hear in blue script a long time ago in the galaxies far, far away, and then you hear that music.
Yeah.
That was a very powerful, very optimistic rendition there, fanfare. But then you have sad renditions in the movie, like when Luke Skywalker is going to the binary sunset. You have more epic renditions throughout the movie, like at the end, for example. So, the celebration, the end room, the throne room, rather. So that sort of ushered a new era of filmmaking where you have these musical cues. Not only do you have multiple of them, but you also have variations of them, so you can see what's going on and help it tie it together. Binary Sunset is one of people's favorite movie moments because of the music as well. This is Luke Skywalker being so hopeful, so optimistic, and yet so limited in his current circumstances. So that sets into motion what kind of character he's going to be, going from basically a poor farm boy who's got no place in the universe to being the center of the universe.
Yeah, that's a great point too. I mean, I love what you said there about you can track kind of the maturation of different musical techniques or different musical moments and have them be associated with aspects of the film. You're absolutely right, and I think that it's really impressive to have one of those themes permeate pop culture. Like, for example, in the Home Alone franchise, like that theme is so iconic, but they have so many motifs that are like, in the movie, and only like two or three of them. That's a John
Williams movie too.
Exactly. But I think every single musical motif of Star Wars, like, you can instantly recognize it. You can instantly recognize, like, the huge horn fanfare in the beginning with the big yellow text. You immediately know that's Star Wars when you hear it. The Imperial March, the scenes where when you talked about with Luke and the binary sunset, all of those moments are associated with a very specific element of the Star Wars franchise, and they're all recognizable. And I think it's very impressive for a composer to have that happen not only once but multiple times over multiple movies. Another example of that is something like Lord of the Rings. I think Lord of the Rings. Yeah, I think Lord of the Rings: Return of the King is probably one of the best achievements that's probably been done with film scoring. I think that like all of these, the theme of Gondor, the theme of the Shire, the kind of ominous music that starts the movie. That movie, you hear it again, and it's presented in such a way where you understand all the thematic elements that the music's trying to convey, but you also are in kind of a backseat element of the story, and you remember how those things made you feel when you first saw them, and then to have them all come together in this one movie, it's a profound thing. And that the same thing happened with Star Wars too. Like you're able to think about how far these themes have come over these few movies that you've seen, but to have them go through this elegant progression through many movies is very, very profound. It's a thing that obviously you need a franchise to do it, but only certain franchises can do it well. And I feel like the world is set around the music, and then that just adds another element to it, kind of a hindsight is 2020 kind of thing, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you can do an entire podcast on the music of Lord of the Rings.
Oh yeah.
So
I will be in heaven.
Yeah. Well, just to pick very specific examples of it. So it's one of those things where, like I said, the whole tracking the progression thing. So one very poignant example is the Shire team, like the theme of the Hobbits. It's introducing the.
Yeah, sorry, I just had to throw in there.
Yeah, very good. So something like that. So right, you introduce it in the first movie. It's like this whimsical thing. These hobbits are very innocent. They've never seen any sort of hardship or anything like that. They're very content living the bland life that they're living. They're very content with that. But as soon as you introduce danger, and they have to go onto this journey that they're just not prepared for at all. The theme always, the musical motif always permeates, whenever they reminisce of home, when they're in a bad situation, they reminisce of home, like when Frodo and Sam are on their way towards Mount Doom, saying, I wonder what the Shire, whether we'll ever see it again.
Yeah, it's certain fondness to it for sure.
You'll have that theme being a very lamentful sort of vibe to it. And, you have elements of the theme being very hopeful, very optimistic, but also very pessimistic. And that sort of anchors the mood into what it is.
Yeah.
But I would say the most memorable or poignant rendition of that theme was at the end of the movie, Return of the King, when everybody is bowing to the hobbits, so that's probably the most powerful rendition of that theme, because now the hobbits are the center of Middle-earth. They were this very unassuming, very
meek
small,
and timid, yeah.
Meek and timid race, which ended up being the race that saved the entire Middle-earth. Frodo and Sam were the ones responsible for delivering the ring to Mount Doom, but then you also had Merry and Pippin with they basically saved the human race, to be honest. If you think about the way how important those characters were, and a lot of people don't, they kind of forget. Treebeard, like the Ents, they're the ones who kind of revived them. And Pippin, sort of, they did a lot for. They did just as much as Frodo and Sam did.
No, for sure. They don't get
and so
the
at the
credit,
end. In the end, they receive that proper credit when you hear that musical theme and everybody's bowing to them. It all brings it together.
Yeah.
And so the movie starts at the Shire, ends at the Shire. So but the music that you hear at the end is not the same music you hear at the beginning, because these characters underwent so much transformation, the music had to go the similar transformation as well. So you have a different variation at the end, which is similar, but it's different.
It shows maturation, like we said.
It shows maturation. Yeah. So you pick up on those nuances, and you kind of like get a deeper understanding of everything that's been presented to you.
Yeah. Along that same line, I mean, if we're going to stay on the Shire theme, you know, when you first hear it, obviously it's similar to the original song of Harry Potter, like that very whimsical, hopeful, very happy kind of thing. They go, you know, on this quest. They start to go on this quest, and so in the Fellowship of the Ring, when that music plays after they leave the Shire, it's always about fondness and like they miss their home, they want to go home. The scenes with like Frodo and Sam talking about the Shire and everything. And the second movie, something that you know, I noticed when I was a kid that was like really kind of profound, like before I even had like a love for movies. It's the scene after the Ents basically refused to help Merry and Pippin. And so like that same music plays when they're talking like, hey man, we have the Shire, let's go home. And then like Merry says, you don't understand. There won't be a Shire if this doesn't happen. Like, and then that music kind of takes a different meaning after that, because all we've heard it do is kind of elicit this fond sentiment for the entirety of the series so far, and then to have that be undercut with no, like there won't be a home for us to go back to, like you don't understand, like everything's going to burn, and that music immediately takes on a different tone as soon as that line is said, even though that, you know, we felt a certain sentiment for the entire movies, for the entire series at that point. And it's like you said, like it's a slight variation that it still has a remnant of what you loved and held dear, but it changes it in a way that's parallel to the character's change.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's just one of 1,000 of examples that we can put up from those movies.
I could do that for like hours. Like it's such a clever technique. I mean, even in, you know, in Harry Potter, for example, you know, you don't hear you know, the Chris Columbus original theme, like when it ends the movie and that really triumphant, like that swell of that cello and the horns and everything, like after you know, the first movie when you see Hagrid like walking towards Hogwarts when they all leave and like that beautiful music that's playing. In the first two movies, when it's like, you know, very whimsical and everything like that, whenever it's like basically the calm after the storm, if you want to call it that. That music is not played for the rest of the series, like that closing theme. But in the epilogue of the last movie, when finally everything is all and well again, then you finally hear it again, and that's very profound. It's like, you know, even though in Lord of the Rings the music changes a bit, you know, you still have the remnants of what you love and held dear, but it's something like Harry Potter, like you don't hear that music again because you understand, holy shit, this kid is going to change and mature in a way they never thought possible. And so that music is basically thrown out the door for 5 movies. And at the end of it, when finally everything is resolved and happy and people are safe, you finally hear that beautiful theme again, which I think that it was very, very clever the way they used it. Oh
yeah, very nice. That's very profound. I didn't think about that a particular example, but
yeah, yeah. Well, you know, I'm a dork, dude. You know, I just, you know, if I wasn't a chemist, I would be, you know, a film critic.
Hey, it's not too late to do both.
We should start writing some scripts, man. We should, you know, get Zack Snyder on our side, and maybe have him make some good movies.
Zack Snyder, call us. We got you.
I don't know. I think he'd be too upset with what we said about Batman v Superman to ever call us back.
Well, I did say I like the music, so.
No, the music was great. Junkie XL did a fantastic job with that with Hans Zimmer. It was awesome. Actually, I think that was the only, besides the fight scene in the warehouse with Batman. Like it was like kind of something pulled right out of the Arkham Knight video games. I think that, you know, aside from that, the music was really the only saving grace of that movie. Everything else made me, you know, want to cringe and cry a little bit.
Right.
Martha. Save Martha. How do you know that name? Can you imagine, like, if sorry to get off topic, but can you imagine if like Batman was beating the crap out of the Joker and then the Joker said, "Save Martha," and Batman's like, "How do you know that name?" and started crying.
You know, I don't know, man. I do want Zack Snyder to be on my good side, so.
Oh, no, for sure. But, like, you know, it's kind of become a meme at this point. Like that and the Turkish Airlines stuff.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah.
Like the marketing for that movie with Turkish Airlines with like Oh man.
Well, everybody does that. It's fine. I feel, Marvel markets with cars all the
Yeah,
time,
but they
like
do it
Audi,
subtly.
Lexus.
They don't like it's not like every time there's a plane like you see the logo and crap and like and you don't have like an entire, like for example, a subtle way to do it was in the Avengers movies they had the Acura logo, like when they're driving away in the last scene of the movie, like the A in the Acura is something that you see, and like that's clever because okay, A in Avengers and that segues to Tony Stark's tower, A for Avengers and then A for Acura. That's clever. But like to have something be so heavy-handed, like the Turkish Airlines stuff, that kind of made me cringe. But I get it; movies are expensive to make for sure.
Marvel doesn't do it heavy-handed, but so like, the last two of the most recent movies, Black Panther and Civil War, both were about cars. So Civil War was about the Audi SUV, which the German police were driving when they were trying to chase Winter Soldier and Captain America and Black Panther. That scene happens and you don't really notice those cars, but then they have commercials, like actual commercials that play on TV where they show those characters interacting, but you have people driving in a car and like being part of the movie, in and out of the scene, basically.
Yeah, actually, to play devil's advocate, there is one really heavy-handed example of marketing in Marvel movies. Spider-Man: Homecoming was pretty bad, like with the Audi stuff and like he says the model of the car, like the Audi like pull up the manual, and he's like, oh wow, look at all these features in this car. I'm like, come on, man, this movie was so good. Like, damn it, Sony.
But it made sense in the context of the scene,
yeah,
right?
for sure. Again, like the most heavy-handed example actually makes sense in the plot, which is like, okay, that's I get it. Movies are hard to make and they're expensive. That I get, but like to have something that just has no place in the plot, like that's just like, come on, man. Like,
yeah, that's true. I agree with that.
Yeah. All right.
Before we want to just ease off this topic. Do you reckon that there is any other like innovations that music can make in filmmaking in the future? Like we've seen where it has gone, we've seen kind of where it is now. Well, what can we do different? Do you think?
What can we do differently? See, it's kind of like we said before, man. I think that we should,
is there room for innovation, basically?
See, I'm not sure about innovation, like new methods of conveying music. I think that the most new method is kind of an oxymoron, because the most new method or the most fresh method would be to call it back to the way it was in the 60s and 70s and even earlier than that, like having an original score and having an overture and like kind of teasing those musical themes. It's like we said, it's kind of fallen the way the dodo bird recently, but I think that bringing those elements back as opposed to just recycling popular songs, I think that would be kind of a new renaissance kind of era in film if people actually stuck to it. And there, like we said, there are people like Tarantino kind of trying to bring that back, but I'm not sure about new methods of music introduction, because I mean there's only so many ways you can use music. I mean having it integrated into the movie is impressive and stuff, but I mean like any movie can synthesize music in a way where it's conducive to the world, but you just have to do it right. And I feel like the innovation will be having it complement the world as opposed to just being a thing that's tacked on in post-production. I think like when music and world building are kind of synonymous and they kind of go hand in hand, I feel like those are the moments where they kind of transcend all forms of media. And we've seen that with Harry Potter, and I'm not sure recently if there's been a lot of movies that have kind of embraced that. I mean, Star Wars comes to mind, Lord of the Rings comes to mind. In terms of modern movies, I'd say that La La Land is probably the closest that it's come to, because the music is so good. Now, granted, it's a musical, so like the point is to accentuate the music. But it would be good to see a kind of a new Star Wars thing, or like a new Lord of the Rings, where the music becomes as iconic.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
Because there was a trend recently where, if you look at the movies of what's his name, David Fincher,
yeah,
things like Social Network or Gone Girl, where it's I don't know how to describe it. It's like electronic, but
It's like distorted electronic dance music. It's like, you know, it's a really good score, but like it hasn't transcended pop culture in a way where, you know, Harry Potter has, obviously. But
for a while, I thought it was like the way of the future, and I'm like, oh, I'm not ready to embrace that. I like the full orchestra and all that, sure. As opposed to just pure electronic, you know.
And that's gonna be so sad about the marketing for the Solo movie, for example. Like, you heard like the Star Wars theme be played by synthesizers and like electronic drums, and I'm like, come on, man, at least get a fucking real score. Like, come on.
Yeah, right.
Like, I get it. You have to set it like in a way where it's like accessible to modern audiences, but I think that modern audiences would like latch on to an original score that's really good, and let alone you're doing the score again, but for a different movie. Like, why would you do it with electronic synthesizers? Just do the actual score.
You know, one thing that I would like to see is okay, so let me give you, before I transition very quickly, give you one example where a director felt that the musical techniques available to him were not good enough to do his movie, and that would be Kubrick in 2001, where he used the Space Odyssey, where he used entirely classical music from, you know, 1800s, 1700s to score his movie, because I think in a later interview he said, well, we have this entire tapestry of music that is better than anything that these guys are going to come up with, so why not use that? But then, you know, what we kind of are missing are a lot of worldly sort of instruments. So like, you know, African sounds, East Asian sounds, Latin American sort of sounds. You know, if you can incorporate more of that sound into movies, I think that would be great. Like Black Panther did that, you know, when they incorporated a lot of Senegalese music into the score. You know, things like that, where you have like these kind of, it could be vocal, instrument, you know, all the drums, percussion, that, you know, maybe you won't necessarily use it to build a whole world out of it, but those are elements you can definitely incorporate into a new score.
Yeah, actually, now you mentioned that, I forgot about this, but you know, remember War for the Planet of the Apes that came out like in July of last year?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, I think we actually saw it together, but something clever they did was, you know how like the 20th Century Fox theme, like they did it with jungle African drums, and like it was a very faint rendition of it, but you actually heard that like in the opening logo. Yeah, I just thought about it because, like, you know, you're talking about like African music or like tribal or like otherworldly stuff. But yeah, like something like that's actually pretty clever. Like the fact that you're subverting expectations by taking a theme and giving it a not a modern twist, but a film genre twist, you know, for lack of a better term. It's like you're setting this movie with a bunch of apes that live in, you know, the woods, that like bang on like rocks and sticks and hollow things, and then to make that into a very recognizable theme, I think is actually pretty cool. Like something like that would be pretty cool. Like, you know,
something like that.
Yeah, like you subvert expectations like that. So
another very specific example, but the Bourne series, the Jason Bourne series, scored by John Powell. It's a pretty iconic score, and mostly electronic actually. Yeah. But what you find is in Bourne Ultimatum, they go to Algeria or Morocco, one of those countries, I don't remember. But they do the Bourne theme using like North African music. So if you guys are interested in the soundtrack, if you look up the soundtrack called Tangiers, where it's like a big action scene, where it's a big chase scene, you can see that the Bourne theme is rendered using African instruments, and I thought that was pretty cool. So that was basically a nod to the location. But I think there should be more ways to make that more pervasive towards film scores in general.
Yeah, for sure. And having it exist outside of the whole like film genre thing we were talking about, like, you know, or a setting genre kind of thing. You know, the only reason why they did it in War of the Planet of the Apes is because there's a bunch of monkeys that live in the woods and bang on trees and sticks and stuff. And so obviously the only reason they did it in the Bourne Identity is because, or Bourne Ultimatum, because of the location they were in. So it would be cool to see them do those kind of innovative things that aren't limited by the genre of the movie that you're scoring, like or not like in the location of wherever the music's supposed to be set in. I'm not sure exactly how they would do something like that outside of just setting it to whatever scene is going on or location or vibe. But it'd be cool to see
the context has to be right.
Yeah, for sure.
But then you have to have that one innovative guy. Whatever director who does it, and then maybe there will be some copycats afterwards. We'll see.
All right, so I think that we've done a pretty comprehensive look at the ways in which music can be used to build worlds. I mean, a couple segues here and there with random topics. I feel like we stayed pretty on topic for most of this, and I think we gave a good amount of examples and how music can be used in films and how it can permeate the pop culture and generally how it can be made to affect different worlds and create original sentiments from movies. I hope that we've I hope we've convinced the audience that music is a very profound thing that I feel like it doesn't really get its day in the sun as much as it should, but it's a truly indispensable part of what makes a movie good, and more specifically what makes a world in film very good.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those timeless elements that's not going to change no matter what. Yeah.
Unless dubstep becomes a film scoring technique, in which I will stop going to the movies.
Hans Zimmer did that in Spider-Man, the Amazing Spider-Man 2. He incorporated dubstep in there.
That was Pharrell. That was Pharrell. That wasn't Hans Zimmer.
Was it? I thought it was.
Go on. I'm 98% sure that Pharrell did that stupid...
The electro theme, that was definitely Hans Zimmer.
No. The electro theme with the electric park, that was Pharrell, dude. Hold on.
Okay, fine. I don't know.
But if it's Hans Zimmer, then I'm gonna freak out. Hold on.
Well, dubstep has to kind of make a comeback before it can be used like that, I would say.
Score. Let's see.
Amazing Spider-Man 2, second one.
Yeah. Yeah. So. Okay. So Zimmer collaborated with Pharrell, but the more electronic elements were Pharrell.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, Junkie XL was on there too.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Zimmer collaborates a lot. Like Pirates of the Caribbean was a collaboration. That even the King Kong, that wasn't him. The Peter Jackson King Kong was also. It was James Newton Howard and somebody else. I think he might have been Hans Zimmer. I'm not sure, but he collaborates a lot, so
yeah.
It's good.
And in most ways, I feel like it serves him well to collaborate with Junkie XL and Hans Zimmer did Batman Superman. And while I despise the movie, the music is actually very good in that movie. But exactly. That collaboration Amazing Spider-Man 2, that one it was a little questionable. But it's a subtle thing to score a movie and have it actually serve the world and that you're building in a movie. And I think that it's a pretty beautiful thing when it comes together. And hopefully we'll be able to look back in a couple of years and actually look at some new effective worlds that have been built and be humming their tunes in this podcast instead of just Lord of the Rings and Star Wars.
The Avengers team is getting there.
It is, yeah, that's true.
Because it was important for them to repeat it in this movie, because otherwise you don't have any consistency in Marvel score. So that's a nice theme to have ingrained in people's minds. So you use it in the trailers and stuff like that. So it's all good.
Yeah, and when Thor comes back in, which is such a badass moment, having the Avengers theme play in all of its glory, unchanged, just in the forefront, that was pretty awesome.
All of the key character moments, so Captain America appearing, Iron Man getting his first suit up, Thor coming back, those are elements where that music comes in. So now it's pretty much ingrained the way that maybe Star Wars score has been ingrained in people. But you'd be hard pressed to find people being able to hum other themes in the MCU. So,
for sure.
Hopefully Spider-Man 2, for example, the Spider-Man Homecoming 2 or whatever it's going to be, will use the same musical themes as the first one, and just keep building. Yeah,
like I said, I hope that worlds that are built spend careful time in the music, and they make tunes that we want to hear. And
Absolutely.
yeah, and things that will really linger around pop culture for some time. Anyway, this has been a very productive conversation. Yeah, it's been good.
Please, if you have any other topics, please comment below. Whatever we may have missed, whatever you would like us to discuss, we'll be very receptive to it.
Please subscribe to the channel. I promise we will answer all of your questions or touch on any comments or any kind of topics you want us to cover. Don't listen to Abdallah. He's kind of a jerk. All right.
I have my moments.
You have your moments. All right. And with that, we are out. So thank you for listening to us. If you listen on podcast on iTunes, please subscribe. Please subscribe to the channel. lonechemist.com for some recent movie stuff, which we'll be posting soon. And we'll see you next time. Peace.